educated and entertained. Hi. We haven't really had a chance to say hello to you guys. And sort of got to say hello to Rose, but just.
Oh, Bhajana came, yay.
Oh, yay. Hi, Bhajana.
Yeah, I think better back there. You know, you all maybe don't know this, but if you remember, there was a lady sitting in the morning session, and we said we knew her 40 years ago. She lived in the San Francisco ashram. Well, Bhajana lived in the San Francisco ashram, and our son was 5 and 6 years old at the time, and she was his nanny. And we have little books that she made, like that she painted and illustrated for him when he was little. We still have those. So, and we've been in touch all these years. Okay, so this is a time to have fun. It's not, I mean, we will share things that maybe are helpful, maybe not, but it's mainly, you know, Master said to giving instruction to his ministers, tell a joke. People like to laugh, and when they laugh, they're relaxed, and they'll absorb the teachings more.
Yeah.
So we've taken that to heart.
Yeah.
And,
maybe too much to heart.
So, okay, well, should we start with the prayer?
Yes. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Beloved Lord, bless us with constance of purpose. Help us keep the needle of our consciousness ever pointed toward Thee. Help us receive Thy love and feel Thy joy so that we might share it with others. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, Bhajana says we have to, thank you, James.
Wow.
Tell the story about the little mice in the wall. This is Devi's favorite ever story, so we'll start with sharing that.
Wait till James is ready, because he has to hear this story too.
Yeah. So this happened, if you can imagine, there was a time before I was married to Devi.
It was the Dark Ages.
Yeah, the Dark Ages. So this happened in the Dark Ages. And I had built a geodesic dome and was living in it, but I hadn't finished the inside yet. So geodesic dome is made up of a lot of triangles formed into kind of either hexagons or pentagons, and then it all fits together. And it's a very strong structure, but because it's all curved, it's a little tedious to finish the inside. So I hadn't finished the inside, but I had insulated it. And insulation in those days, it had kind of a silver foil on one side and then kind of glass, fiberglass, kind of like cotton candy on the inside, and it was pink. Anyway, so the dome was finished to the extent of being insulated, but that was it. And one evening, I heard in the insulation inside a kind of a squeaking. And so I listened carefully, and I then could tell there was a little mouse family living in the insulation. And I thought it wouldn't be a good idea. I needed to get them out, but I didn't want to hurt them. So I went over and I listened carefully so I could locate where the nest was. And then I clapped my hands like that. And the mother mouse got scared, grabbed one of the babies and ran out along the strut. And the baby was about the size of a bumblebee and pink. And so as she was running along, again, I clapped my hands and she got scared, dropped the baby. I had gotten a gallon jug,
Glass
jar that was about that tall, and I'd put some straw in there from outside, just so they'd have a little nest. So I took the little baby and I put it in the gallon jar. And then I waited a little while till I heard the squeaking again. And then I went and did the same thing, clapped my hands. And again, the mother ran out with the little baby. And again, I scared her. And so this went on until I had collected 4 little babies, and there was no more squeaking from inside the wall. So I figured, okay, I've got all the babies now. But how am I going to get the mother mouse? That's a whole nother issue. So I took the glass jar and I balanced a ruler out over the edge, and in such a way that the mother mouse, who was by now worried and frantic to get to her babies, she could run up that ruler. But as she did that and got over the jug, it began to tip and she got scared and ran back. So 2 or 3 times she ran up and down. But because she was so motivated to get to the babies, she finally ran a little bit too far, and the ruler tipped and fell with her into the jar, and I plucked the ruler out. And so I had the whole little family in there and left them there overnight. And then when daytime came, I took them out into the woods and let them all go. So that's Devi's favorite story.
And my second favorite story happened in Assisi with the mice.
Oh, that. Well, that's less dramatic. But
do you want me to tell that story?
Yeah, you tell that story.
So we were visiting some friends, a family in Assisi, and they had a new son, a new little baby who was sleeping in the crib. And they had seen a little mouse running into the baby's room, and they were horrified, just horrified. And so Jyotish said, let me see what I can do. Yeah, he'd already developed confidence that he could catch mice. And so he, just like you see little kids doing, he had a shoe box. He asked them, do you have any empty shoe boxes? Yes, we do. So he got a shoe box, and he put a little stick propping it up, and with a string tied to the stick, and he put a piece of cheese at the back of the box, and we were all eating dinner. No one was paying, and he was eating dinner too. No one was paying attention, but Jyotish was watching that box with the string, and then at a certain point in dinner, we heard this thump, and the little mouse had gone in there, and he pulled the string, and it pulled out the stick, and the box fell on top, and we put a piece of paper underneath and caught the mouse. And our friend, the mother, she thought he was God at this point, and the husband was a little bit jealous because she said, I could have done that, I could have done that. Anyway, but there's a spiritual allegory in all this, which I'm not sure what it is, but I really, I think it's there.
Yeah. You're looking at me for the spiritual allegory?
Did you all read the blog I wrote about the lizard? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Because this was a story from nature that has a spiritual allegory. This was also, I think it was 1000 BC before we were married. And I was living in a little trailer up at the meditation retreat. And there's a certain kind of lizard, it's called a brown skink. And it can eject its tail quite far. And there was a lovely little gray cat named Lottie, who lived up at the meditation retreat at that time. And she didn't belong to anyone, but she caught mice in the kitchen and in the dining room, so everyone fed her. So one morning, I was walking up a little forest path to get to the dining room for breakfast, and I see Lottie. She wasn't big, but she was fluffy and pretty and gray. She was just crouched on the little path, and she was looking at something. And I got a little closer, and then something shot off about, really from me to Haley, that far. And then I got closer, and the Lottie had the little limp body of the lizard in her mouth, but the tail was down the path, thrashing, because the nerves are still...
You have to thrash now a little bit. Yeah, good, okay. Good.
And I got too involved, and I said, Lottie, no, leave the tail. Oh, Lottie dropped the mouse, ran after the tail, and then she's got this little bony thing in her mouth, and what happened? I said, Lottie, the lizard's getting away, and so she dropped the tail, ran after the lizard, caught the lizard again, and then the tail started thrashing again, and Lottie dropped the lizard, and this time I thought, you're interfering with the karma here. If she's not going to catch it, you just don't say anything. So the lizard got away into the underbrush, and Lottie's left with this little bony tail in her mouth, looking like, oh, God, I missed the point. And I got up to the common room, the dining room, and I saw Seva. Some of you know her. She was one of the great, great lights of Ananda. And I told her what happened, and I said, Seva, I know there's a spiritual message here. I just don't know what it is. And she, without missing a beat, she said, detachment. So those are apropos of, it's sort of to help you to relax. Now you can ask questions.
Yeah.
And who has the mic? Oh, Keshva.
Oh,
okay. So if you want to ask a question, you can come over by Rita and use a standing mic, or Keshva. Okay, he'll bring it to whoever is brave enough to ask. And let me say, if he hands you the mic, hold it below your chin, because if you hold it at your mouth, it doesn't pick up.
It picks up, but it picks up too much.
Mm-hmm. It's distorted. Okay, the brave are the people.
I was wondering if you could talk about the very early time when you spent with Swamiji, and I remember you saying that there was one of his personal assistants or secretaries at that time who was maybe a little curmudgeon-y and had a particular distaste for you, Jyotish, and so much so that she ended up leaving. But just more so speak about maybe some principles around being open to whoever God is sending at that time, and maybe your own experience of being open to whoever God has sent over these years, and how to keep things harmonious and still open.
Okay, this is an interesting story. So I had been studying with Swami for about a year. I met him actually Easter Sunday, 1967, and I took classes with him. He would teach a 6-week class series. It would be yoga postures, hatha yoga for an hour, then there would be a half-hour break, and then Raja Yoga. It was basically our how to meditate course. And he was living in San Francisco, as I was, and so he would teach in San Francisco, but he would also teach Marin County and Sacramento and down here in Palo Alto or San Jose. Anyway, so he moved around, and about every 3 or 4 months, he would teach that class series in San Francisco. So I took the class series. Next time he offered it there, I took it again. Next time he offered, I took it a third time. By this time, he knew I was much more than just casually interested. And so I started working as kind of his helper. So I would carry books, and I would sit at the door and take the registration money, and just helping out the way so many of us help out with whatever events are going on. Then it came a point where he asked me to quit my job. I was working as a social worker in San Francisco, to quit my job and become his assistant. And it was a big decision for me. And I had one of the really important superconscious dreams that I've had in my life, because I was trying to decide. I knew it was not just a shift of a job. So I had this dream, and I was walking through a meadow with a fishing pole. And by this time, I had loved to fish when I was a kid, but I gave it up because I didn't like hurting the fish with a fish hook. And so, but here I was in the dream with a fishing pole, and I came on a cave, and in the cave there was an underground stream, and I knew I was supposed to fish there. And so I threw the line in, and immediately there was a tug on the line. And I've reformed to a large extent, but in my younger days I was a terrible punster. I just bedeviled all my friends, constant puns. Well, here I'm having this really important spiritual dream, and there's a triple pun in it. So I pulled the line out, and there's a sunfish. That's a kind of a fish, little multicolored, pretty little fish about that big. And I was really concerned, so I was carefully trying to take the hook out of its mouth, its lips. And I don't know if you've ever seen the kind of posterized, sort of semi-psychedelic painting of the sun with ruddy cheeks and big thick lips, and then the hair are the flames coming out. So I was carefully trying to get the hook out of this fish's mouth. Then I looked, and it was the sun. So sunfish turned into the sun. And then I looked again, and it was the baby Jesus. So sunfish, son, son of God. So that triple pun. And the baby Jesus looked up at me and said, if you want to know what it feels like to be a fish, you'll never know by sitting on the bank. Turned back into a fish and flopped off and back into the stream. So I knew I immediately sat up, woke up, knew what the message was, that if I really wanted to find out what the life of a yogi, if I really wanted to follow my spiritual aspirations, I couldn't sit on the bank and do that. And so with that very strong message, I told Swami, yes, I would go to work for him. So Navashan is referring to my very first day. Up until this time, Swami had this big work to do, but all he had were some volunteer helpers that were some more or less, usually less regular. So I came into work Monday morning. At that time, there was visiting an ex-monk who was a direct disciple of Master, visiting Swami, and the two of them had been fellow monks together, and they were there, and this young woman who had been volunteering and helping Swami. But somehow my coming in was really threatening to her. And so, Swami and this man, Adano, were in the living room, and we were in the next room. And I said, well, what do we have? We probably need to get a mailing out, because I knew that we sent out mailings. How do we do that? Do we have a list of names? Do you have that typed up? None of your business. And I was taken aback, and I said, well, do we need to, what do we need to do today? None of your business. And this went on about 3 or 4 times like that. And by this time, Swami and Adano, being the wise people they were, exited the living room, and they were hiding in the kitchen. And so this interchange went on for about maybe an hour. And I would ask a simple question, and this, none of your business, or I can't tell you that, or you can't do that kind of thing. And then finally she said, I'm quitting. And she got up and walked out and slammed the door. Well, naturally, I was absolutely mortified. Here I am, the first day, the first hour on the job, and I've already blown up the whole system. So I was really embarrassed. And then Swami and O'Donnell Lay came out of the kitchen, and they were both laughing and laughing. And Swami, I apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, Swami. He said, no, don't apologize. Thank you. I had no idea how I was going to get rid of that woman, but you did it for me. So that was my first hour of the first day with working with Swami.
But
so,
then,
yeah, not always smooth.
But then to go on to
The question
about getting along with people, Swami has used the analogy that living in community is sort of like putting rough rocks in a rock tumbler, and they knock against each other and they spark off and knock off the rough edges, and then at the end they're these beautiful smooth stones. And I don't think I've ever had a period of my life at Ananda where there wasn't some rock I was tumbling against. But if you get the bigger picture, you say, this is part of the process. You're working out karma with that person. You're learning how to get along. And Swami would often put people that were evidently had really intense karma with each other, put them together working on the same project, just the two of them. And it was more fun to observe, I think, than it was for the two of them. But, it just not to be afraid of it, but to just say, people who, spiritual families such as Ananda, we've been together for many lifetimes, many, many. And we have good karma and we have unresolved karma. And I won't even say bad, I'll just say unresolved, that we have to learn how to harmonize it. And it's actually, as time goes by, it becomes more fun because you have enough experience under your belt where you realize it always ends up good in the end. So.
But there are different ways, I would say, different levels of working with it. Where there's a little bit of disharmony, do everything that you can just to make it harmonious. Harmony is more important than getting your way or being right. And so if there's just a little bit of difficulty, do that. If you can talk together, then bring it up. A problem that's under the surface never gets solved. So bring it up into the light, but do it in as non-confrontational way as possible. Just like we have this difficulty working together, let's see if we can figure out some ways to harmonize more, to work it out. So if it's mild, you can do that. If it's, one might say, medium, then probably you can't approach it directly. But I would say then don't approach the problem as a problem. Approach the disharmony as an issue and just try to spend time together or do things that don't bring you into conflict. And then where there's a really, we've had people at Ananda who can't get along with anyone. And they're really disharmonious. And for them, Swami would bring them into the center and hold them in his energy. But generally speaking, most of us don't have the magnetism, the uplifted magnetism to do that. So with somebody that's really disharmonious, generally speaking, they do better working on their own. So find something that's important so they can feel that they're really contributing, that's important to do, but where they own that project. Because many times disharmony comes from some sort of a issue with authority, and they don't like to be told what to do. So find a way that they can do their own project as much as possible, and then do what you can to integrate. But you can't give a cookie cutter answer, this is always the way you deal with it. Deal with it as consciously and as communicatively as the situation allows.
But it's part of one's spiritual growth, truly. You don't need to run away, but just say, okay, what's the answer here? And there's always growth involved.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll try to give shorter answers because we want to actually end a little early so we can go over to the art show. So we'll try to end by 3:20, something like that. We have an hour. Okay? Rose.
Okay.
Okay. I had a question about self-acceptance and compassion alongside growth and sort of the willpower it takes on the spiritual path. I think I've noticed in myself and others, my friends, we can be, as devotees, hold
the mic a little lower, because it's lower, yeah.
Hold high expectations. And so while holding these high expectations, also balancing a sense of, right now, God is with me no matter what. There's a sense of, there's no separation. You know, it's not like I have to meditate more, or now I have everything I need. God is with me, I'm enough. But also holding that sense of high ideals and that balance of gentleness and striving.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question, Rose. You want to?
Yeah, I can start. You know, the real answer to that question is self-forgetfulness. Not to think I'm bad, I'm worse, I'm better, I should try harder. Whatever you're doing, like we saw you the other day and you were rehearsing for the play, I don't think I've ever seen you so joyful. And so whatever you're doing, throw yourself into it. Think of the service, think of the energy flowing through you. And the more we are always holding up a mirror, am I growing spiritually? Am I growing spiritually? It blocks that flow of energy. So self-transcendence is self-forgetfulness. And that's why service is so important, sadhana is so important, self-offering is so important, all of these things. And try not to set bars that you have. Swami never did that. He saw everyone as an individual, and he saw everyone has their own unique path to God. And I know in the early days, when I first came, there would be these people who were meditating, long, long hours, 5 hours every day. But they weren't getting in tune. They weren't serving. It was all about them, their spiritual growth, their sadhana. And to a person, those guys left the path. And then there were people like Seva, who Swami gave the name Seva because she just served and served. And she just became a saint before our eyes because she never thought about herself. She just thought about how can I help others.
So I would say absolutely self-forgetfulness is the key to so many, many things in life. And the more you're self-forgetful, the happier you're going to be. The more you're concentrated on yourself, the less happy you're going to be. Because, let's face it, you're never going to get what the ego wants, because this world is designed to prevent you from getting what the ego wants in order to drive you toward what you really want, which is fulfillment in God. But nonetheless, all of us are plagued to some degree, greater or lesser, with the problem that we aren't self-forgetful, that we do think about ourselves. We are concerned. Given that reality, try to be more gentle on yourself. We often are too hard by setting unrealistic goals for ourselves. So in society, if you look in any magazine, who's modeling the clothes? It's a perfect model who's been photoshopped and looks perfect with every hair in place. And you and I are comparing ourselves to this false image and saying, well, I'm deficient because I don't look like that. I can't. Well, we do the same thing spiritually. You know, who do we compare ourselves to? Master, an avatar, Swami, a saint, you know, and oh, well, I'm not coming up to snuff, so I must be a terrible person. Just, we need to relax and say, I'm doing the best I can. I mentioned this morning, but the best running advice I ever got was, the question was, how do I know if I'm making enough effort in my running? And the answer was, if it feels like you're making an effort, you're making enough effort. So spiritually, if it feels like you're trying, you're trying. That's enough. Yes, we do have to hold an aspiration. We do need to have a goal that is enlightenment or moksha, and that's a valid thing. But we also need to understand that that is a journey of 10,000 steps. It's not something that we can rush to in a single day. And so there's a balance. And Rose, you do yoga postures. You do it all the time. That's your profession. You can't tense into a deeper yoga posture. You have to relax into it, and then you can go into the stretch more fully. Same spiritually. You can't tense your way or think your way into union with God. You need to relax, because ultimately you already have arrived at the goal. You aren't trying to move somewhere. You're just trying to understand or realize that you're already where you're trying to get to. So it's only the delusion that you aren't there that makes you think you aren't.
Okay, who has the mic? Okay, Shantala.
I have a question about Dharma. I think I've been trying to maybe use a lot of my mind to figure out what my Dharma is for this life, and tried a few different things, and I'm still trying. What would you advise for someone who is really looking to find and live their Dharma?
Start by asking God to show you what your Dharma is. But you can't just hold your breath. You have to act, and take one step. Does this feel right? This morning in the Q&A, we were talking about just constantly trying to be referring to God for guidance, inner guidance. And so you take a step. Does this feel right? Am I comfortable with this? I know when I was in last years of college, before I had heard of Ananda, I was thinking, what can I do for the rest of my life? And I would look at, well, maybe I'll be a professor of anthropology. That's what I was studying. And I thought, I looked at the other people doing it, and I thought, I would get tired of that at a certain point. Well, maybe I'll do this. No, I get tired of that. And then I came to Ananda, and I thought, I won't get tired of this for the rest of my life. This will see me through. So ask yourself, look to the future. Can I do this long term? But try it. See how it feels. We have a friend in India, Aditya, who is a doctor, and his sister was thinking of going to medical school, but she wasn't sure. So there's a program of pre-med where you volunteer in a hospital to see if you really want that experience. And she did it, and she did want it. And she went on to medical school. And so ask for guidance, act, try, feel in your heart. Does it feel right? Take the next step. Does it still feel right? And then this is one of the great blessings of meditation, is there's that, the ego wants to identify with what it's doing. I am this, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an executive, I'm a tech person. But the soul doesn't identify with any of it. Okay, maybe I am a doctor, but that doesn't define me. And so through meditation, and it's so freeing, because you realize it doesn't matter all that much. The Dharma for every one of us is to grow spiritually and to find our true self, to find out who we really are. So if you can start with that, this is my real Dharma, is to discover who am my own higher self. And then the outward expressions will, your own karma will take care of that, okay?
Yeah, to build on what Devi just said, it's very helpful to keep reaffirming that my real Dharma is to find God. My real Dharma is the spiritual search. That gives you a reference point. So then when you ask a lesser Dharma, what occupation should I do? Should I marry? Should I? All of those subsidiary questions, if they're just asked in and of themselves, you can get off base. But if they're asked, what occupation should I do? Where should I work? So that it can enhance my movement toward my real Dharma, which is self-realization. Then it begins to put everything in perspective. There's a nice visual way of thinking about this. If you're in a desert and you're just trying to walk, but you don't have a reference point, you will always end up walking in circles because one leg is dominant and it takes a little bit longer step than the other leg. And so you'll end up walking in circles. And so the way around that is to find some reference point in the distance, and you travel toward that reference point. And if you get there, then you get another. So the reference point here is your spiritual search. And that'll keep you from dharmically walking around in circles and being confused all the time. And if you keep asking, how is this going to help me in my true Dharma, then it will straighten out. Then I would say, within that, it's got to come from you, from inside. Within that, then go to people that you trust and that are objective, because it's hard to see when you're inside your own drama. When a little bit outside, it's easier. So get advice from people that you trust, or if that isn't, obviously pray. Devi said that. Ask Master. Sometimes if you're asking a question about some issue in your life, it's helpful to say, not what should I do, but if I had my best friend in this situation, what would I advise her to do? And that little bit of distance can sometimes give you clarity. But really the real answer is that you're trying to align all the, one might say, sub-dharmas with the one major dharma of your spiritual growth.
And to hold true to that, don't compromise. I had a funny story when I was in college where the psych department, the psychology department, was always doing experiments. And you, as a college student, you could sign up and they'd pay you $10 to be a subject in this psychological experiment. But you never knew what it really was about. And so I signed up for this one, and they put me in this totally dark room. And they said, there's going to be one point of light. And they said, we're measuring the eye movement, and you have to tell us if it's moving to the left or to the right. And so I thought, well, I've got to get oriented here. So it was totally dark, but I held my thumb up so it was right next to the light, and I could tell if that little point of light was moving or not. And they said, okay, is it moving left or right? And I said, it's not moving. And they said, okay, now, and this went on for about 15 minutes. And finally, I said, it's not moving. And they said, it's moving left or right. You have to say which one. And I said, I don't care if you never let me out of this room. That light is not moving. And then all the lights went on, and the guys came in, and they said, you've ruined the experiment.
Yeah, we have to discount your part of it.
Because it was just about psychological influence. The light was not moving. But I was the only one who said, it's not moving. But why could I do that? Because I had a point of reference. And if your point of reference is finding God, then someone says, oh, you should be a this or that. And then you say, it's not according to my point of reference of my own higher self, that doesn't work. So that's important.
That's why we sing the chant Pole Star, because in the early days of sailing, when they didn't have a compass, they would look at the North Star, which is the pole star, and then they knew which direction was north. So that was the reference point. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's been really wonderful being with you. I have a family, so I'm a householder. My name is Eloisa. I'm a householder, and my husband is not on this path. He's very supportive of my journey, but he's not on this path.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah.
So I'm a householder, and my husband is not on this path, though he's very supportive. And I have 2 children. They also don't seem a whole lot interested in this path, which is very important to me. I know that it's my experience to have, and that I'm learning a lot. So that's wonderful, but with my children, I don't know how much to inculcate this. They're preteens and teens now. And so this morning when you said that your son was a little bit rebellious and that you felt like you didn't want to lose the connection, I'm getting to the point where I feel if I, keep presenting them with my path, that I might I might interfere. I'll be less good. So I don't know if you can speak about it.
Surely. Just for people that have wonderful experience in working with teens, I would also maybe have a talk with Kshama, Keshava Hese, and because they're doing that all the time, how to instill values in teenagers that are not necessarily spiritual, but they're upward moving. But really, I think the best thing we can do is the example of our own lives. I've heard so many people who come on the path as adults saying, my mother had a copy of the autobiography on her bedside table. She never talked about it, but I always remember her reading it, regularly. Many people have said similar things, that, my parents had the autobiography on their coffee table. They never talked about it. It was just there. So I think the example of our own lives, and Master, in fact, said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kshama, but I'm pretty sure he said, don't try to proselytize your children. Our path is a path where it has to be your karma and your own desire. And by seeing who you are, by the love you give to them, and I know this from experience in our own life, because our son very much rejected spiritual teachings, but now he's really coming back to them as an adult, because, in fact, he said to Jyotish last year on his birthday, he said, when I was growing up, I never understood who you were, but now I do, and I appreciate you, and I realize how lucky I am to have you for a father. But he had to come to that on his own. So pray for them. I'm sure you do. I don't have to tell you that. Pray for them, live your own life with integrity, and then maybe get some tips about instilling higher values in teenagers. But your children, our children, come to us for a purpose, for us and for them. There's a karmic link. And that they would be born to a mother and father, but to a mother who's a deep devotee of Master. It's for a reason. It's not just, no, there's a purpose there. And the vibration of the home which I'm sure you set that vibration, it's like a fish in water to them. That's the vibration they know. And they'll seek it in the right time and in the right way when they go out on their own, I would imagine. And again, watching the history of Ananda, there are very few of the children that it's a direct line to the path. Most of them leave. And the ones often that don't, and they have to find their own way. And I think that's great. Because then when they come back, it's like, I want this. Not because you told me, but because I want it. And we have some wonderful examples sitting in this room. And so just have patience, just live your life with integrity and spiritual sincerity, and be there for them in any way that they need, spiritually and questioning about the values of life. But again, from our own experience, Master protects our children and guides them in ways I never could have imagined. Miraculous, really, protecting them, guiding them, bringing them to the light. I've never seen it fail. So be reassured, they're in Master's hands.
Yeah, I would maybe just add that you don't want to proselytize, but you do have a responsibility to set both a high vibration and a model of the fact that this is very meaningful to you, that you find great fulfillment in it. And so you want to give them a positive example of what it looks like, what a person who is on the path looks like, but without the message that you have to do this. Just give them the positive example, but don't let that positive example be suppressed because, oh, I can't say anything, or I can't, I need to hide my spiritual life. That wouldn't help them. In India, I don't think it's maybe as true as it used to be, but Master kind of amusingly said that whenever they needed correction, it always came with a story from the scriptures. So they got told a story and corrected at the same time by their mother, in fact. And so if you can, it's a kind of an art form, but do try to project your spiritual path, and if you can tell any stories that are appropriate to the situation. Basically, you want to give them a positive impression and a positive model of the spiritual path. And if they're at all open to it, it would be good to bring them around to Ananda activities, and especially if there are any things with other kids around their age. Because if they see models of kids I assume they don't go to the Ananda school. Yeah, if they see any models of kids in the Ananda school who are really benefiting from these teachings, that'll leave a positive impression. But you can't impose that on them. So just see what you can do. But anyway.
But they're always watching you.
Yeah, they are.
And they're drawing from, a child is always watching his parents, and they say one thing, but they do another, and so you have to, in a way it's good because you really have to walk your talk. But I remember when our son was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years old, one time he asked us, "Why do you always do everything Swami asks?" Swami Kriyananda. And I paused and I thought, this is an important question. I have to answer this well. And I just said, well, he's our best friend. And we love him. And we just want to do things that he asks. And this little boy, 10-year-old boy, kind of thought about it for a while. And he said, I guess I don't know how to love anybody like that yet. And, he realized it was a kind of expression of love he hadn't experienced yet. And so children are always watching, and they're learning from you much more than we realize.
And he had a very wide arc, but where he has ended up is a wonderfully dharmic, wonderfully positive, energetic person, a really fine person. And honestly, even though he's not a devotee, because he has not been able with integrity to have that guru-disciple relationship, I have deeper conversations with him about the philosophical principles than I do with the vast majority of people at Ananda. So a lot of times things are there in essence, but not in the form that we might expect them to be.
But all of our extended family are blessed by having a family member on the path deeply. I know my older brother had a very turbulent life as well. And then a few years ago, he said, how do I get this Kriya? And I knew he wasn't ready. And I said, well, there's different steps, and discipleship is involved. He said, oh, I don't want to do discipleship. I don't want to do this. Okay, I didn't think he did. But he knows someone who he has a deep connection with is doing that, and it gets planted. Yeah. Maybe the seeds come back later, next lifetime. But so our whole family is blessed by our own focus. Okay, next question.
Okay.
Stand up, and it's easier to, yeah. It's good.
Hello.
Hello.
Yay, okay. So about struggling with a little bit of boredom, or perhaps the grit to keep going when you need to just keep going. So in whatever I do, I notice there's this kind of learning curve, and it's really exciting, and it can be overwhelming, and it's a lot, but it's great. And then you reach the plateau, and it's a respite, but there's also this oh, well, I'm a little bored, but it feels right to keep going. And then there's usually a little bit more of a curve. So these plateaus are great, but there's also, I'm not quite sure how to ask, but there's a little bit of feeling of boredom. How do you create an ever creative, ever new thing with something you just kind of have to keep going with, the long term? There's those pockets where you just got to keep going, but how can you bring the willingness into it when it kind of wavers?
And question to you, how are your mom and dad?
Oh, they're great.
Good.
Thank you.
Say hi to them.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we all experience that. In fact, it's one of the common aspects of being in this world. Master said something that is educational and entertaining at the same time. He said that, as we know from our teachings, that there's duality. There's plus and minus, but he said it's like a wave. So you have a wave, and it rises up with enthusiasm towards something, and so you've got the wave rising up, and then perhaps it hits that plateau, or perhaps it doesn't quite achieve. Anyway, it crashes down. So you've got the wave rising up and crashing down. But he said, in the middle, in between that process, the wave is flat and it gets bored. And so it will purposely start another drama. And that's why the alternating moods and alternating difficulties that people get in, basically we get bored. We want to be stimulated. We want to be excited. And so that's the time to try to take the energy, but not always express it outwardly. Take the energy and try to draw it in more in self-offering. So in those kind of plateau states, as you described them, before the next big project and the next big push, try to use that time to integrate and to affirm more deeply what I'm really after is not outward stimulation, but I'm after what really I'm after is fulfillment, which I will find in you. And so help guide me toward that. And then your own karma will take you on the next wave anyway, so.
And remember, Master described God as Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, and he added ever new bliss. And so we have to also try to be creative in our spiritual search. You know, it isn't just like the lifetime we had where we were medieval monks and nuns, where, you know, every day we went to matins and then this, you know, the different real systematic. If you have a creative nature, which you do, you need to try to make your spiritual life creative. And I don't mean eclectic, but I mean, you know, maybe you go through a period where you start by chanting for a half an hour and then you meditate. Or maybe you start by meditating and then you listen to a talk of Swamis for a half hour or whatever it is. But don't think it has to just be the same thing every day. For some people, that's great and they thrive on that. But for some people, it's not. And so you need to keep saying, what is inwardly inspiring me? And then adjust what you're doing within the context of our teachings, our path, our vibration. And then maybe sometimes it's serving more. You know, maybe you are serving in different ways. Maybe you go to, you know, a pet shelter and, you know, work with little home abandoned pets. Just as an example. But just to do what maybe the same things, but do it in different ways. Do it in ways that keep you motivated. And then after a while, and it takes different people, different periods of time, but then the process of meditation actually after a while becomes very creative, but not at first. So just keep it fresh, keep it.
I'll also add that there are just layers and layers and layers to this question. Basically, God is motionless. We can't imagine that, but the state of Satchidananda, ever new bliss, is without motion in it. But when he comes into creation, he creates motion to it. And that motion, we get used to it. So the still state of upliftedness is sattvic, the motion is rajasic, and the still state, but with no motion, no motivation to it, is tamasic. So that rajasic state in there is always there until we reach enlightenment, but it gets subtler and subtler and subtler. And I can tell in myself that at this point in my spiritual development, one of my great, if not the greatest enemy that I face is just what you said, boredom. Because I'll get to a sattvic state and I can feel that I'm ready to go deeper, but I get, one might say, frightened of the boredom of a purely sattvic state. So it's almost like if I were to go to the astral plane, nice, I'd hang out for a while, but what is there to do? You know, so there's that, it's basically there's a rajasic momentum, and we have to have the courage to try to push back against whatever impulse it is to cure boredom by more rajas. And but that gets subtler and subtler and subtler. Basically, I would say, for the large part, let's at least try to make our rajas directed toward God.
And, you know, this is also in response to what Rose asked and to what you asked, and someone asked a similar question this morning. Really, there's no room for guilt on the spiritual path. We're all doing the best we can, and we're all doing it in our own way. We all make mistakes. And we just need to, like we're an army of soldiers moving towards God. Maybe one of our brothers or sisters stumbles and falls. We run up and help them stand up again, and then we all keep marching forward. So guilt is a very useless and very self-limiting mental concept. Anyway, just to realize that if we were free of karma, if we were perfectly understanding, we wouldn't be here. Sri Yukteswar said we'd be adorning some higher plane, but we're not. We're here, and we're here to support each other in the journey and to love each other and not to accept each other on a deep level. Okay. Now I see our dear friend. Yeah, we can have another question, but you know what we're going to ask you to do at the end, Sir Yanni. Be prepared.
Somebody sent in this question, and I think it's a good one. Is there a way to know when a desire has been fulfilled? For example, sometimes desires go away simply with the passage of time, but they are not always fulfilled. And there's a second part to this question. I'll try to state what this person is asking. I'm not totally clear. Many years later, an opportunity may be presented to fulfill a desire, and I've found that when I've taken it and I continue with that activity, I voluntarily give it away in order to satisfy another need or want, but my heart still yearns for the previous one.
You look very puzzled.
Well, yeah, it's complex desires. Desire, my great enemy, So anytime we have a desire, we end up creating a state of unrest in ourselves. So sometimes we can, if not fulfill the desire, we can diminish the desire by not fulfilling it. But there may remain some residual subconscious desire for that. And so Swami addressed this in several ways. One, he said, if you have a desire, it's like a wild horse. He used this image. It's like a wild horse. You don't tame a wild horse by yelling at it, nor can you necessarily control it. What you do with a wild horse is you train that wild horse to take a rein. And with the reins, then it still has energy, but you can direct it. So when it comes back to desire, if you have a desire for, let's say, for acquisition, you want money, you want things, you want security, whatever it is, you want to be secure by acquiring things. I think Swami would say, don't try to suppress that desire because it won't work for you, but acquire things and then give them away. So you fulfill the desire and then you transform it into a higher expression, because ultimately it's really just energy. And energy is directed toward wanting this, and you may move on from that form, but the desire for acquisition is still there. It's just going to shift one way or another. So it doesn't help just to say, deny this form and let it go to another. But as I say, try to understand that energy is going to express itself, but you need to guide it in the direction of its expression as much as you're able to. And by doing that, by guiding it toward, coming back to your question, Shantala, guiding it toward the direction of your higher aspiration, in this case, spiritual unity. So you take that desire and you say, what is the best way I can get this aligned with my deeper desire? which is spiritual growth. The real problem is that we can come up with that solution in a satsang when we're sitting here calmly. In the cold light of day, when we're caught up in whatever we're after, it's hard to remember these principles. That's why we need satsang. We need each other to kind of help remind us. But basically, suppression of energy does not work, but guidance in the direction of transformation is what does work. And that's one way of summing up the whole of the spiritual path. And the allegory, as you well know, the allegory of the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, these tendencies can't really be killed, but the energy of these tendencies the form of that can be killed so that they can be transformed into something higher. But the energy itself is going to go somewhere. So we need to learn to, if not completely control it, at least guide it toward our ultimate goals.
And if we can keep, no matter what desires grab us by the throat and we can't seem to be free of them, if we can say, all right, I can overcome that, but I will not let that block my search for God, block my desire to be a devotee, block my desire to meditate every day. And if that's the desire is less pernicious, less harmful than the undermining of our confidence that what we really want in life is to find God. So the desire is just kind of a shadow player saying, oh, who are you to seek God? Look at you, still want this and you still want that. But if you can say, yes, I do, but I also want God. And then really the desire kind of, oh, okay. But, Master told the story of one of his disciples who was an alcoholic. And and he was a Kriya Band, and people would say, how can you be on the path? You're drunk half the time. And the man, he would do his Kriyas, meditation, with his Kriya beads in one hand and, as Master tells it, a glass of whiskey in the other. And people would mock him and laugh at him. But little by little, he kept up with the Kriyas, and little by little, the whiskey just put it down, got to the point where he took all his bottles of alcohol and dumped them out on the street because he never gave up. And so that, again, that's more of the problem with desires, is it undermines our faith in ourselves as a spiritual seeker. And if you can just say, okay, I do this, but that does not define me. And then the grip loosens. So it's, and add one little thought on that, and I hope this doesn't create anxiety in anyone, but with the practice of Kriya, oftentimes desires come out of the blue because you're drawing the energy up from and enlarging or activating, magnetizes the different chakras where our old karma resides. But don't be discouraged by that, because what's happening is that karma has been there all along. It's just coming to the conscious mind now, that desire, and then it can be released. So again, working with difficult people, working with desires, all of it, working with bad karma, working with all of it is about keep one pointed on your goal for God, and all these things will fall away. And the day will come where you stand at the peak of the mountain and you say, Lord, I have done it. I have made it to the summit. And all the other things just become very, very, you look back and you say, oh, why was that such a big deal? And why couldn't I get along with him? And why did I want that? And it just doesn't seem important anymore. So we are stronger through the grace of Master than our bad karma, than our desires, than our self-doubt, if we just cling to the Guru, and we'll reach the summit.
A couple more simple thoughts. Don't identify yourself as I am this. Swami used the example, if you smoke, don't say, I am a smoker. Say, I am a soul who has a habit of smoking. So that non-identification with something lower is helpful. The other thing I would say is that the spiritual path is directional. It isn't this or that. It's little steps at a time. And if it's false to say, I don't have any desires, then say, I'm working toward the point where my desires are lessening. Nayaswami Jaya is a very wise person. And he said, I'm not at the point where I'm willing to say that God does everything and does everything through me. He said, it just doesn't feel real to me. But I am at the point where I'm willing to say, and with real realization, that God and I do it together. And so that often having a mid-step between black and white, there are some gray zones in there, and those gray zones are directional. So work with desires in such a way that it isn't either I have them or I never have them, but I'm reducing the number and I'm refining the quality of the desires that I have.
You know, speaking of Nayaswami Jaya, Nayaswami Dhyana told us a story that happened in India when Jaya was giving a discourse, having a satsang, and it was an introductory talk to invite people to join the How to Meditate course. And so Jaya had given a very inspiring talk and then asked for questions. And one man raised his hand and said, well, you're talking about your path, but do you have any powers? And Jaya, having a subtle mind and being a very integritous person, he kind of said, and Dhyana said, everyone was really interested. Okay, do you get powers on this path? And then Jaya said, no, I can't say I have any powers. And she said, everybody just went, oh, like that. And then he said, but I have one. And then everybody perked up, and he said, I have the power to choose whether to be happy or not. And everyone just said, oh, and she said everyone signed up for the How to Meditate course, but we have that power.
Yeah. And then he went on to say, I don't always use my power, but I have the power.
Okay. When you said there was a question online, I was a little bit afraid somebody had the wrong number and they were asking, can I get fries with that?
Yeah. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes before we want to take a break.
So we'll maybe have one more question. And then this morning, Suryani asked a wonderful question. She's sitting in the back. Jyotish wrote a chant some years ago that we haven't played for a long time, and she's been playing it. So we'll end with her playing this beautiful chant that Jyotish wrote some years ago.
I am curious if you can share a time where you had a big attachment and how you two overcame it.
I couldn't quite understand.
If you can share a time where you had a big attachment.
Oh, big attachment.
Deep attachment, and how you overcame it.
Okay.
Sometime in your life, maybe it could be 20 years ago.
I'm trying to think which of many we could talk about.
Yeah, but I'll tell you one, and it's a very, I think, instructive for people. From the time I was growing up, I had a drive to accomplish things, and I was a good athlete. I was a good enough scholar. I did well in school. I was basically successful at everything that I did. Then there came a time at the beginning of Ananda where we didn't have any sources of income. And so for a while, I was very attached because of this kind of pattern of mine of succeeding. I was quite attached to trying to find a way to earn money at Ananda Village. And so, but it was a real attachment. You know, my mind was going there constantly, my thoughts were going. And instead of trying to suppress it, I let it run. And at that time, in the early days, I started an incense and an oil business, perfume oils, and it employed the majority of the people in the community, and that's how we earned our living and were able to do it. But by directing that energy toward being successful, being, in fact, attached to being successful, by directing it towards something that served the higher purpose of Ananda and of Yogananda, I finished that karma, and then one day I had no more interest whatsoever in operating a business. Many years later, we had a reading like, it was called a nadi reading, but like Brigu reading, and during that reading, it was incredibly perceptive. But the reader said, "You have never been in business." And I said, no, that's not correct. I said, you know, I explained I'd started this business. I ran this business for several years. And he said, "Was that for your own personal profit, or was that in service of the guru?" And I said, "Well, it was to help Ananda." He said, "Then that's not business. That's guru seva." And so the point here being, whatever attachments we might have, don't necessarily try to suppress them, but try to spiritualize them. And it works better that way. Eventually, these things go by grace and they go by karma. Swami would often quote a Greek myth where Hercules was wrestling with this giant, and he would hold him up, and then he would get a little tired, and he'd put him down. Well, the giant, his mother was the earth, so whenever he came in contact with the earth, his power grew stronger again. Finally, Hercules summoned up the power to hold him up, and he diminished and diminished and diminished, and he kept him up until he died. Well, attachment is like that. If we hold it up toward the light, toward our ultimate goal, it will diminish and diminish, and then eventually it'll fall away of itself. But if it's strong, it's hard to kill it.
Maybe the best story I could share is how attachments were ripped from me and what I learned from that. And this harkens back.
Should I leave the room?
If you want. And this was, of course, the forest fire. And we had our son had just been born. He was 11 days old. Most of you know the story. And the house burned to the ground. We lost everything. The only thing we got out of it was that morning of the fire, I looked in the meditation room, and I hadn't had time to clean the house very much. And the meditation room was messy. So I took all of our precious things from the altar and put it in a shoebox, right by the door. And I thought I was taking our son for a checkup. And I thought, when I get back, I'll clean that room. Well, I never got back. But Jyotish was able to get that box out. And we had a nice home. We had beautiful, I love house plants. We had 80 house plants and nice little room set up for the child.
This is the mousy dorm.
Yeah, this is the mousy
dome, but by now it had paneling on the wall.
And, so I left in the morning, and it was funny when I left, because I turned around and I looked at it all. And then I walked out the door, and I never saw it again. It burned up. And for about 2 days, I was really in a state of shock. And then I said, well, okay, you got to get out of this. And so I just took some time, and I thought about everything that we had that was now gone. In as much detail as I could remember, that plant, and that new little plant, and that big plant, and that quilt, and that bed and that, that shirt. And I thought about each thing, and then I just gave it to God. And then I knew where it all was. Before that, I was like, where did my life go? And then it was like, oh, God has it all. And in that process, I realized that and of course, part of it was motivated to provide a secure, nice home for this little child. And I thought, the only thing I really can offer this child as far as security or home is my own love. That's all, that's mine. The rest of it, God took. And so the point being, whatever you feel a strong attachment to, you don't have to give it up the way it was torn away from me, but just offer it to God. This person is yours. This job is yours. This child is yours. This talent is yours. I just give it to you. It's not mine. And then it gives you that little bit, like the lizard, that little bit of detachment. And in that detachment, you can let it go and let it go. And I'll tell you, if you can achieve detachment from something that you are attached to, you enjoy it 100 times more because you're not afraid of losing it. You say, okay, it's yours, God. It's on loan.
And if you're not quite ready to completely give it to God, at least make him co-owner.
Co-owner.
Co-owner. So you own it together.
And well, Suryani, we're going to close. Maybe you come up and chant, but while she's coming, I'll tell you all a story. You may have heard this, but there was a woman, please come, and we'll get you set up, who was she was a direct disciple of the great Saint Ananda Ma, and she was very prophetic in our own life. She was a dear friend of Swami's and of ours, and there were many things in our life that she predicted that happened. And so we were living with Swamiji in Los Angeles at the time, and we were talking with our friend Hari Priya, and I don't know why it came up, but I said, I've often wondered which one of us will leave the body first. And she paused, she took it seriously, and she said, no, I see you both going into the light together. And then, we were living in Los Angeles, Jyotish said,
well, that probably means that we'll be on the LA freeway and Devi will be driving. But there was also a very sweet and deeper story. Same person, Hari Priya. And she was with Ma in India for many years. And then Ma said, it's time for you to go back to America and get married. That's your karma to do so. And Hari Priya said, I don't want to do that. I don't want. And Ma said, it's your karma. And Hari Priya said, but what am I going to do? And then Ma said, it's better to live in the world and long for the ashram than to live in the ashram and long for the world. And so it's better to work on ending a karma, but keep our mind directed toward our spiritual goal than to try to suppress it. But our mind is constantly, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. So if we can find a middle ground in there where, as I say, make God the co-owner for a while until you can truly, with integrity, give it to him completely.
Okay, so we'll just close now with this chant that Jyotish wrote many years ago.
Did you want to give an explanation on it? Or?
Yeah, I mentioned that this because she played it this morning. I haven't thought of or played or heard this chant for many years. Anyway, every chant that we have has a different kind of bhav to it, a different purpose. And many of our chants are chants of affirmation, of striving, and I'll do this, I'll try to open my heart to you, try to have you come in. This is different. This is not a chant of striving towards something, but this chant, the words are as you'll hear them, it's an affirmation of already having arrived at the state at which that we're otherwise think we're striving toward. Because in fact, we already live in the heart of God. We're already integrated. It's just that we don't realize it yet. So.
Yes. Thank you all for coming together this afternoon, and I hope you can walk around the corner and come to the art exhibit.
Yeah, so 5 minutes and we'll start the art gallery.
Just wait 1 second. No, just go. I just want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was.
Jyotish, I just couldn't say just your name, so I stumbled. I'm so grateful for being on this path. I'm so grateful for having both of you. Just as really, and especially for last night, I think that he made some inroads with both of my loved ones there.
I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay. I'll just tell you, this is going to be fun, so don't miss it.
I'd like to just say a few sentences that I said this morning that I think are meaningful to repeat. And that is, when we look at the art, and Jyotish will speak
That
about
was nice.
this.
Yeah,
He
mostly there.
commented this. What's happening? Oh, James took care of it. Yeah. They told a story this morning about Swamiji inviting them down to his apartment almost every night for a long time. Always, he would call them 7 o'clock. Would you like to come down and watch a movie? And they would say, of course, sure. And they said almost every night it was either Bambi or Cinderella or Lady and the Tramp. And he said, of course, it wasn't about the movie, but it was about sharing his consciousness. It was very beautiful the way they told it, but basically that's what it was. I'd like to suggest that as we go and we look at this art, and we'll listen to Jyotish talk, it's the same thing here. Jyotish and Devi, who have spent their entire adult life on this path, deeply attuned to Swamiji and to Master, their consciousness is expansive, as you all know and you can hear. He made the comment this morning, I hope I'm not misquoting him, somebody can correct me who was here. He said, my consciousness is expressed even better in my art than it is in my speaking. Is that what he said? Yeah, okay, Rita's saying yes. So remember when you look at the art, and as I said this morning, it's not that we have to buy his art. It's not really about that. But it is about realizing that as you're near it, or if you choose to own even a beautiful print of it, if not an original, that it's Jyotish's consciousness that you're inviting into your home, into your life. And of course, that is of Devi's as well, because these two have been, Jyotish went to Swamiji many, many years ago, and he said, I'd like to invite Devi out on a date. What do you think? And Swamiji said, I think you ought to marry her. True story. Very soon after that, they were married. This is a marriage that was literally made in heaven. Maybe all marriages are, though it may not always feel that way. And their consciousness has been so beautifully intertwined. So it's the consciousness of Jyotish and Devi that has been made manifest in this art. And I just wanted to say that to all of us, to everybody, as we go over there, let's hold it that way. So.